Some familiar foods are beginning to disappear from grocery store shelves. Not loudly, no announcement. Just gradually less, gradually more expensive. Then suddenly gone when you truly need them. This is no longer a prediction. It has already happened in many places, from canned tomatoes, butter, cooking oil to coffee. When the climate becomes unstable, production costs rise and supply chains tighten. Basic foods are always the first to fluctuate. The problem is not that the world is running out of food, but that people realize too late. When prices are already high, choices are already few, and preparation becomes much harder. This video goes straight into 10 foods that are quietly leaving shelves right now, and why they are always the first to disappear whenever the economy becomes strained. Understanding a few steps early is sometimes the difference between calm preparation and being swept into the panic of the crowd. 10. Canned tomatoes. There are changes in life that do not arrive with noise. They come very slowly, so slowly that you only notice when something familiar is no longer in its usual place. On a very ordinary afternoon, you walk past a familiar supermarket. The lights are still on. The music is still soft. Everything looks as if nothing has ever changed. But the row of canned tomatoes is no longer as full as
well,
before.
Until you get
Not
to the actual
empty,
store.
Just a little more
There
sparse.
you'll be...
You pick up a can, then put it back down, thinking that next week when you return, it will surely be full again.
in cans.
Most major changes in life begin
Were
with
you
small
supposed to
moments
get
like that.
whole tomatoes?
Behind those silent cans is a chain of shifts very close to the present.
You about these
Processed
7
tomatoes in North
main
America
varieties
depend
of
heavily on
canned
a few
tomatoes.
concentrated growing
What they
regions
are,
in California.
well, it can
In
just get
recent years,
confusing.
prolonged
There's
drought
so
has
many
tightened
different...
irrigation water supplies. Fertilizer and fuel costs have risen sharply, and agricultural labor has become increasingly expensive. Many farms have not disappeared.
If you've ever been shopping
been
for
forced to reduce
tomatoes
planted
in
acreage
the
to survive.
produce section, you may not know.
Production has not collapsed. Only that each season, a
You
little
know,
less.
is that all of these products
processing,
use
the
cooked
pressure
tomatoes.
continues
So
to
these
rise.
are not in the
Electricity,
aforementioned
the metal
produce
used
section.
for cans,
These have been
long-distance
canned
transport, and storage all cost more than before the pandemic. When forced to choose which products to keep profitable, foundational but low-priced items like canned
benefit from
tomatoes
further
are often
cooking.
the
If you've
first to
ever,
have
you know,
production
had to
reduced.
deal with skinning a
As a
tomato
result,
before cooking taste,
supply
it just
does not
isn't
vanish
very
suddenly,
good.
but
So
becomes
once
irregular.
these are opened, if you
Full this month, sparse the next. Then small gaps appear that only frequent shoppers
active
notice.
and can be sealed,
But the
that
real
way it
story
won't get
is
that
not in the
metallic
farms or the
taste. That's
factories.
just fresh is a
It is in the
wonderful
kitchens
thing,
of families
but like in
trying
the
to keep
dead of
spending
winter, you may
at the
not
lowest
find that.
possible
So there are
level.
differences
One can
in
of
what
tomatoes
you're
can
going to
become a
use
pot
these
of soup
things
for
in
several
tomato
days.
juice.
One
You
pot
can
of
kind of
pasta
think of
sauce
these
can
as
feed an
the
entire
mother sauce
family
of
at
canned.
very low cost. In times when money begins to tighten, people always return
These
to the
are the
simplest
least
foods.
processed of
And
the
just as
bunch. These
demand
are
quietly
simply
rises,
tomatoes that have been
Supply in distant places is already falling with almost no one noticing.
know about whole
That is
tomatoes
how
is
the
that
most
these are
basic
usually
things
the
leave the
best
shelves
of the
first.
for canning and well
Not
put
because
into
they
the
are
can,
rare,
ready to go.
but because too
A
many
diced
people need
tomato
them at the same
tomato, where
time.
you really want that
Then one
texture,
day,
you want that
you return to the
visualization.
familiar
Because
supermarket.
when these are canned,
The
they usually
shelves
have
are
something
still
called
lit,
calcium
But the gaps
chloride
between
and
the cans are clearer than before. You realize you are witnessing a very small change.
you can
Small enough
mechanically
that no
break them
news
down.
report
You could put them in
mentions
a blender, you could put them
But
that have
large
been
enough to make
cooked
ordinary
before
life
they've
no
been
longer as certain
canned.
as before.
So they might be
History
these
rarely
are
begins
tomatoes that
with
have been
loud
stewed.
events.
They've been
It
more of a
usually
cooked
opens with a
taste. They're
very
going to
gentle
have kind of a
absence of
softer
things once
texture
considered
because they
obvious. And when a can of tomatoes is no longer always there, it may not
there's
be only a
often other
story
ingredients
about food,
in them. These,
but
for
a quiet
instance, have
sign
like bits
showing
of
that a
celery. To
familiar
use
phase
stewed
of
tomatoes
life
in
is
recipes
closing,
because they can bring
more
flavors that
slowly
you
than
may
we
not
think.
really be looking.
9. Dried pasta. Dried pasta looks like something that will never disappear. Light, cheap, stacked across shelves. like an old promise that life is still stable. But behind those simple pasta packages is an almost complete dependence on durum wheat, a crop that survives only in a few narrow climate regions. Just one drought in the wrong place, one pest outbreak, or transport costs rising by a few percent, and pasta prices can edge upward across the world without a single urgent news report. Not loudly, just that each trip to the store, the number on the shelf is a little higher. But the real reason pasta thins out on shelves is not in the fields. It is in very ordinary kitchens. When electricity rises, gas rises, fresh meat becomes something to weigh carefully. Fruits and vegetables are no longer bought freely but chosen one by one. Millions of families almost at the same time return to the cheapest meals that are still filling. And pasta is always the first choice. A very familiar evening, a pot of water boiling on the stove, a pack of pasta broken in half to serve more people, a jar of tomato sauce opened from the week before, and someone speaking very softly. So tonight we will eat like this, nothing tragic, just a little quieter than usual. No one complains, but everyone hears it. What empties the shelves is not one person buying too much, but millions of simple dinners like that happening at the same time. First, the familiar brands disappear. Then, the large packs. Then you begin to see thin gaps, not large enough to call out of stock, but enough to make you search longer. And when you have to search longer, it has already begun. Real shortage does not begin when there is nothing left to buy. It begins in a very small moment. When you stand in front of the shelf, look at the familiar pack of pasta, then quietly lower your hand because you must calculate whether the weekend will still have enough money for medicine, for gas, for the electricity bill or not. You do not leave it because you do not like it. You leave it because in your mind there is an invisible list, and anything not essential is crossed out first. When even a pack of pasta makes you hesitate, it is no longer about price. It is a sign that you are stepping into a phase where life begins to charge an entrance fee for everything, even the simplest meal. Those who have lived through difficult times understand that. They do not panic. They do not fill carts. They simply keep a few packs of dried pasta quietly in the corner of a kitchen cabinet, like a small latch to keep the house from slipping away from the feeling of normal. They buy a little more when the price is still acceptable. They rotate, use first, and replace later. Not because they believe in the end of the world, but because they have witnessed something very real. Nothing collapses all at once. It leaves little by little. And if you want to understand why dried pasta disappears before many other things, remember this. When the economy tightens, people do not buy better food. They buy food that stretches the meal. Pasta does that. It turns a little sauce, a little vegetable, a little scrap of meat into the feeling of still being dinner. It keeps the rhythm of daily life from breaking. And because it keeps the rhythm, when pressure rises, people hold on to it first. There are days when what protects a family is not more money, just a corner of the kitchen cabinet that still has a few packs of pasta and a pot of water that can still come to a boil. If there comes a moment when even that becomes difficult, you will understand. What disappears is not pasta, but the sense of safety we once believed was free. 8. Butter does not disappear because of a lack of milk. It disappears because of cold numbers inside the factory. In recent years, as energy, labor, and operating costs have risen, many dairy processing facilities have been forced to adjust their production lines. They prioritize products that bring better profit, such as cheese, fresh cream, or whipping cream, items that can be sold at higher prices and turn capital faster. Butter, is not always on that list. And it only takes a small reduction in output for the shelves to begin to change. You may have seen this without truly noticing it. One afternoon, stepping into a familiar supermarket, the butter section is not completely empty, but the kind you buy every week is gone. Only a few higher-priced boxes remain under the cold light. No announcement sign, no major news, just a very slight shortage, exactly the way supply chains usually shift before the majority realizes. The most frightening thing is not an empty butter shelf, but that you cannot remember the last time you saw it full. What is special is that butter belongs to the rare group of foods that can be frozen for many months, even close to a year, with quality almost unchanged. Therefore, people who understand how the market works do not wait until shelves are empty. They simply and quietly buy a little more each time they shop. No panic stockpiling, just preparing one very small step earlier. Sometimes preparation is not because you fear hunger, but because you do not want to stand helpless when a loved one needs an ordinary meal. A 72-year-old viewer wrote a very simple sentence under the video. "I don't panic buy. I just pick up one extra stick of butter each time I shop. And somehow that small habit makes me feel a little more secure." Real shortage rarely begins with a completely empty shelf. It begins in the moment you open the refrigerator and realize the thing that was always there suddenly is no longer certain. When that happens, the value of a few sticks of butter resting quietly in the freezer is no longer just food. It becomes a very small sense of control, a pocket of calm preserved in the silent changes of the outside world. Crisis rarely begins with big things. It begins when very small things quietly disappear from your life. And sometimes, just a few sticks of butter resting in the freezer are enough to place you on the side of calm instead of panic. If you are still watching to this point, try looking back at your kitchen for a moment. On the most ordinary days, how many things do you truly have on hand that are enough to carry you through a few days of disruption? You can share one item you always keep at home in the comments below. I read them all. 7. Cooking oil. Cooking oil is not the first thing people worry about. It is not the main dish, not the thing that fills the plate. In ordinary life, it is almost invisible, always available, always there, always taken for granted. But oil is concentrated energy. Just a small spoonful can add hundreds of calories to a meal. And in difficult periods, when everything begins to become more expensive, more scarce, and requires more calculation, that energy quietly becomes the thing that determines whether a day passes easily or not. You may have seen that moment without realizing it. A very ordinary evening. The pan is still hot. The food is the same. Only one very small change. The person at the stove tilts the oil bottle a little more slowly, as if silently calculating how many more meals the remaining amount will last. No one says it out loud, but the kitchen understands, and it is gestures that grow smaller like that, which are often where major shifts begin, not on the news or in distant economic numbers. Cooking oil depends on more fragile things than we imagine. Harvest seasons in distant fields, fuel prices to press and transport it, ships crossing the ocean, and even economic decisions that shoppers never see. Just one link slowing down, prices can rise very quickly, and supply begins to thin in a way almost no one notices. The most frightening thing is not when oil disappears completely, but when it is still there, yet expensive enough that you must hesitate before each use. When oil becomes a luxury, a meal is no longer about taste, but whether the body still has enough energy to make it through tomorrow. Those who have lived through difficult times understand this very clearly. They do not stockpile in panic. They simply preserve a very simple ability: to still cook food, to still add enough energy for a meal to keep a person alive. Sometimes, what keeps a family from falling into fear is not money, nor fully stocked supermarket shelves. Just a bottle of oil not yet empty resting quietly in the corner of the kitchen, enough to cook one more meal without too much worry. And if one day even that small thing becomes difficult to keep, you will realize what is slowly disappearing is not only cooking oil, but the feeling that tomorrow can still begin with a meal as complete as today. 6. Canned fish. There are days that look completely normal, yet you no longer have enough strength to cook a complete meal. Not a holiday, not a crisis, just a very tired afternoon when the body needs something quick, simple, and enough to carry through the rest of the day. In moments like that, canned fish is almost always there. Quiet, simple, and enough to keep a person moving through one more day. No refrigerator needed, no preparation required. Just a very small click when the lid opens, and the meal is ready in a kitchen so quiet you can clearly hear the sound of metal touching metal. Light falls softly across the table. Rain drifts slowly outside the window. Everything looks the same as every other day. Only the feeling of safety is thinning little by little without almost anyone noticing. But behind those small cans is a fishing industry changing in silence. Many seas are tightened by quotas year after year to prevent depletion. Fuel costs for fishing vessels have risen after global energy disruptions. Younger workers leave long voyages at sea. New environmental regulations make it difficult for output to return to former levels. No major announcement, only supply slowly shrinking, while prices quietly move upward. There is no sudden collapse, only a little less each season, a little more expensive each year, and each time you return to the supermarket, the shelf looks thinner than before even though no warning sign is posted. But the real disappearance does not begin in the ocean. It begins in very quiet kitchens, where people must calculate more carefully for every small meal. A week of tightened spending, a storm that cuts the power for several days, an elderly person living alone who no longer has the strength to stand long at the stove. In those moments, a small can of fish becomes the simplest meal, but also the most reliable one left. Not because it tastes better, but because it is still there when many other choices have quietly left daily life. Shortage rarely begins with empty shelves. It begins when an ordinary food suddenly becomes something you must hesitate to buy. Not because you do not want it, but because you are no longer sure it will still be there tomorrow. And sometimes, what leaves the kitchen first is not food, but the feeling that life is still normal enough for us to live with peace of mind. At this point, you may think this is only a story about ordinary prices, but the next 5 items are directly connected to a family's ability to stand on its own in the first weeks when normal life is disrupted. 5. Peanut butter. There is a very strange paradox in the history of food. The simplest things often survive the longest through every upheaval, not because they are rare, but because they are cheap enough for anyone to buy, rich enough in energy to replace an entire meal, and durable enough to sit in a kitchen cabinet for months without spoiling. Peanut butter belongs to that kind of food. Not loud, not luxurious, yet always appearing at the moment people need a fast and reliable source of strength. Just 2 small spoonfuls carry calories equal to a light meal. No stove required. No electricity required. No time required. In periods of economic stability, it is only a child's snack. But when living costs begin to tighten around families, that very ordinariness becomes the greatest advantage. People are not searching for taste. They are searching for something that helps them move through tomorrow at the lowest possible cost. And the moment millions of people think the same way is when real pressure appears. Not on the peanut farms, not in the grinding factories, but in the speed at which goods leave the shelf faster than they can be replaced. The cheaper, more convenient, and more energy-dense a food is, the more strongly its price fluctuates when society enters a period of mild instability. There is no crisis, only a quiet shift in demand. What makes peanut butter special is not in its nutrition, but in the feeling it brings. A full jar may not make you richer, but it creates a kind of reassurance that is hard to name. The sense that no matter how busy, tired, or short on time tomorrow may be, there is still something simple enough to carry the body through one more day. In survival psychology, sources of energy ready immediately always hold value far beyond their price. History shows that whenever the economy declines, foods like this are always the first to leave their normal state, not disappearing completely, only becoming more expensive, smaller, or purchased faster than expected. And those very small changes often appear earlier than any financial news. Because sometimes, the clearest sign that a period is closing is not in the stock market, but in the speed at which a jar of peanut butter leaves the shelf faster than yesterday. If you think this is only about price, then from here on, it becomes about how long a family can stand on its own when life is disrupted. 4. White rice. There are things so familiar that people almost no longer see their true value. Rice is one of them. Not expensive, not special, just resting quietly in a small kitchen and staying with a family through many years, calm enough for us to believe it will always be there. But behind that normality is a system more fragile than we imagine. Most of the world's rice supply depends on very few major exporting countries, and history has shown many times that only one decision to hold back production to protect the domestic market can change global rice prices within a few weeks. No war needed, and no major natural disaster. Just the fear of shortage appearing in one place, and it spreads very quickly to kitchens far away. Real shortage rarely begins with empty shelves. It begins very lightly. One small price increase we think is only temporary, then another, until the familiar bag of rice suddenly becomes something that makes us pause for a few seconds before placing it in the cart. That moment is not the fear of hunger, but the feeling that something once certain is slowly leaving life. An elderly woman once said she was not afraid of hunger. What she feared most was the day when the familiar bowl of rice no longer felt the same as before. The sentence sounded very small, yet it touched a worry deeper than food. The worry that stability itself is quietly cracking. And sometimes, the first sign that an easier period of life is closing is not a major event. Just the moment you stand longer than usual in front of a familiar bag of rice, then realize you have just hesitated over something you never had to think about before. If you find reflections like these helpful, you can press like so the video can reach more people who need the same calm you do. And if you want to continue preparing quietly, without panic, you can subscribe to the channel so we can walk together. 3. Powdered milk. There are things in the kitchen that are almost unnoticed until they are no longer there. Powdered milk is one of them. Not appealing, not fresh, and rarely bought for today, but for the elderly, for children, or for days when fresh milk is no longer available. It becomes a quiet but essential source of nutrition. The supply of powdered milk depends on many fragile factors: rising livestock costs, severe weather reducing fresh milk production, or tighter safety regulations in processing. There is no sudden shortage, only gradually less, gradually more expensive, and harder to find precisely when people need it most. What makes powdered milk different is not its flavor, but the moment it becomes important. People buy it for days when the body grows weaker, for weeks when going outside is not convenient, or for a period when caring for health becomes more fragile. So when it disappears, the feeling of loss is not only the absence of an item in the kitchen, but the loss of a silent layer of protection for those who are most vulnerable. And sometimes, the clearest sign of instability is not a major shift out there. Just the moment you stand in front of a familiar shelf, looking for a very ordinary box of powdered milk, and realize that the thing that once always seemed available has quietly disappeared. 2. Dried beans. There are foods that are never considered special, yet appear again and again in every difficult period. Dried beans are one of the very few such things. Not expensive, not elaborate, just resting quietly on the kitchen shelf with a shelf life almost longer than the memory of a peaceful season. What makes beans important is not their flavor, but their endurance. This is one of the cheapest sources of protein people can rely on when income narrows and choices slowly diminish. In most major economic downturns, demand for simple foods like beans always rises first, not because people want to live more frugally, but because they need a certain way to keep living day by day. The shortage of beans rarely draws attention. There are no suddenly empty shelves, only quantities slowly decreasing, prices rising slightly, and then at some point, the familiar bag of beans is no longer in its usual place. Changes so small that many people notice only when they truly need them. There is one important difference between dried beans and many other foods. People do not buy them for today, but for days that have not yet come. For weeks when spending must be tightened. For periods when stability becomes more fragile than usual. So when beans begin to grow harder to find, the feeling of loss is not only the absence of a meal, but the loss of a final option to keep life from slipping too quickly away from its familiar course. And sometimes, the clearest sign of a difficult period is not in large economic numbers. Just the moment you stand before a very ordinary shelf, looking for a simple bag of beans, and suddenly realize that the thing that once helped people survive many harsh seasons is slowly becoming no longer as easy to find as before. 1. Coffee. Coffee is not for survival, yet it is what keeps the human spirit standing in the most exhausting days. Global coffee supply depends almost entirely on climate conditions in a few narrow growing regions. Just one frost at the wrong time, one prolonged drought or crop disease, is enough to reduce output for many years, because coffee trees need a very long time to recover. These disruptions are not loud, but they quietly push prices upward and make shelves grow thinner. What is striking is this: when instability appears, people do not only store what they need to eat, they hold on to what keeps life feeling normal. A morning cup of coffee does not solve any crisis, but it keeps the rhythm of life from collapsing too quickly. So when coffee begins to grow more expensive, harder to find, or disappears for short periods, what is lost is not only a drink, but a very small sign that familiar stability is leaving life more slowly than we can notice. And sometimes, the moment a morning is missing a cup of coffee is the quietest way for the world to say that everything has begun to change. Shortage rarely begins with empty shelves. It begins when very ordinary items slowly become more expensive, harder to find, then disappear when you need them most. Preparing early is not about fear. It is simply a way to preserve something very important in times of instability: calm. If today you choose to prepare a few small items in advance, that is not extreme. It is a quiet way to protect your family from changes that arrive too quickly. Let me know in the comments. Which item do you always keep ready in your kitchen? And if you believe calm preparation is always better than panic, subscribe to the channel. Here, we do not talk about fear. We talk about readiness.